What's up, you guys? This is Devin from Century. Oh, I stepped on your foot. What's up, you guys? It's Devin from CenturyFX Studios, back with another video. Today, I'm here with Celeste.
Celeste.
Anna Celeste. Did I do it wrong?
You did. You said Anna. It's not Anna.
My sister's name is Anna, so.
But it's two N's, right?
It's a nickname.
So, yeah.
What's up, you guys? It's Devin. Okay.
Sorry.
Hold on. I gotta grab the pole. Okay.
All right.
Hold on. What's up, you guys? This is Devin from CenturyFX Studios, back with another video. I'm here with Anna Celeste.
Hi.
We're in her studio, but today we're going to be really presenting you guys with how to build your studio from the smallest budget to the biggest budget, from strobes to constant lights to maybe even some natural light that we have in here. We're going to probably be moving around the studio a little bit more. A couple of backdrops we have here, so stay tuned and watch out, and maybe you'll find your budget to where you can work on your own studio images by yourself or with somebody else and create great images despite where you are. Now, you got anything to say, Anna? Sorry, I did it again. I'm sorry.
It's alright, we'll edit it out.
I did it again. This is a habit. I've been doing it for
I know it. It's hard.
30.
You'll get it. But Celestial Studios is a joint dance and photography studio. I'm a model. I work mainly out of my studio. I also travel, and I teach pole, both at a local studio and at my studio here, doing private lessons and such.
Alright, so this camera's gonna be hopping around. We're gonna be hopping around. We're gonna be doing a whole bunch of stuff. So bang with stuff.
Oh no! What was that?
What's this thing right here? So you might be thinking to yourself, Devin, what are you using to take these pictures? Well, I'm using the 5D Mark II with a 50mm 1.8. You might be saying, well, how much is that camera? The camera's about $400-ish, $500. It has to be used because Canon doesn't make it anymore. But it's a full frame camera and it's 21 megapixels and it'll give you great image quality. The 50mm 1.8, most people have it. It's on Amazon, $80 to $120, depending on if you buy it new or used. Now, the first setting that we're going to be in is natural light. Natural light is free. You can find it in a window, or you can find it outside. You can go outside, but today we're inside a building, which is Celestial Studios, which is a small building. But nevertheless, it has a big window, which I immediately got the thought that we're going to use natural light because it's going to show the freeness, the ease of use of such a great light. Now, the window is your modifier. That's the first thing you want to think about, or that's the first thing I think about, is the modifier. The window is your modifier. So that means when the light, the natural light comes through the window is doing this reflective, diffusing kind of thing. It's almost like it's almost exactly like a huge softbox, because the way the window works, it really bounces the light around before it actually hits the subject. Gives you the best quality of light, that soft light on a subject. A lot of people love soft light for subjects because it makes them look beautiful. So the window is free. It's also a free modifier, and it gives you some of the best light because the light is soft on your subject. Now you have to think about the time of day, because the time of day will dictate how much free light you actually are going to have in this image. And it's also going to dictate the color of the actual light coming through. So we're on the constant light. We have to understand that the constant light is a little bit different. How is the constant light being modified? Because chances are, if you have a constant light, that modifier around it, or whatever the light is going through, is going to be something you purchase deliberately. So I know she had a square softbox. The square softbox makes square catch lights, but I didn't mind that. I just wanted to use her lights for the purpose of the tutorial. The lights are anywhere between, well, you can't really buy these lights by themselves. Probably, if you can find a set, it's probably $50 to $75 to $100, depending on what set you get, because you can get a whole bunch of little CFL bulbs in there, or I think they're called compact fluorescent bulbs, about 75 watts each. And you can either get one, or you can get ones with multiples. That's why I say it goes about 50 or to 150, depending on what brand you get. And typically these are the cheaper lights, but you can still get great images with these. You just have to understand what it's giving you based off of what you got. Now, I know I got a 5D Mark II with a 50mm 1.8. I also have an 85 1.8. I also have a 24 to 105. Now, all these focal distances, let's not talk about apertures right now. Focal distances are going to dictate how much I'm going to be able to get into that image, how the settings are going to be, and stuff like that. So you have to know that, okay, I know I'm going to get torso up headshots because I don't want any parts of the outside of the backdrop to be in the image. So I'm going to either be using a 85 or a 50 1.8. Now the 85, anybody can buy the 85 1.8 for about $200 to $300 on Amazon, but it's one of Canon's best cheap lenses. These two, the 50 and the 85 1.8, two of Canon's best cheap lenses. But I'm talking about the 1.8 version 2 for the 50 millimeter. Also, you have to think about the white balance. When you're using a constant light, like I'm using a constant light right now to light myself, you have to think about the white balance, because that white balance coming from that constant light, which is probably going to be indoors, is going to be different from your indoor light. Now, I have my indoor light cut off, so I don't have to worry about that crap. But when you're using that, you're going to have to understand that that constant light is going to have to be modified correctly, but it's going to have to be, more importantly, white balanced correctly. Usually they come from the Amazon or whatever store you're buying at 5,500 degrees Kelvin. On the Kelvin scale, that's about daylight balanced. It's on the bluish, ish side, but it works. It works for most situations, but you're gonna have to tell your camera that you're shooting that way, because if you're shooting with two dramatically different white balances, which we were, because we had that lamp on in the background that was really, really orange, and then we had the constant light on, which was really, really blue in reference to that one, we have to tell the camera, hey, what is the correct white balance for this person that I'm shooting? Because we're going to get a mix of both, and we don't know exactly what you're thinking, camera. So we told the camera custom white balance, but at first we took some images without it being custom white balance, and then saw how that came out, and then she wanted to play with the white balance just to invoke a different mood. So we shot a little bit colder, I believe, a little bit bluer, and we got these results. But you have to think about that mixture. You also have to think about the shadows. When you only have one light source, which we elected to choose for this first example with the constant light, you have to understand that when you're using one light source, you typically have one big shadow on the opposite side of your model, depending on how much power is coming out of that main light source. So if your light source has a lot of shadow, is producing a lot of shadow on the opposite side because you don't have a field per se, and a field is just another light or a reflector filling in the shadows. And even then, even if you have a good field on the opposite side, you might still have shadows on the backdrop. So some things to do to remedy this is to bring the model up away from the backdrop. That'll keep that shadow and chase it away from the backdrop. And then if you want to, you can fill the shadow in with a reflector on the opposite side, or do nothing. It's up to you. You're the creative photographer, but you have to think about these things before you start. And then, like I was in a limited time situation, you can't just sit there and be like, oh, I don't know what to do, and keep experimenting. At some point, you have to learn, because you're going to be able to get a lot more done on restricted time. You can't just take up everybody's time, especially if you're a professional, or even if you're just a hobbyist. If you're taking a picture, most of the time you're going to be taking pictures of somebody else, and time is always of the essence, even if you're not getting paid. When you're doing all of that, you have to understand that shadows do come into play. Remember all these things about using another light source, and the next time you go on a shoot, you'll save so much time. Bang, 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 bang. Now, the last thing you need, some of the last things you need to understand is that, is the light powered? Now, if the light's powered, if it's powered into the wall, you have to plug it in. If you plug in that light, then that light has a finite amount of room it can work in, because it's based off that distance that the cord is giving it. So you might not be able to bring the light to the opposite side of the model, or behind the model, or in front of the model, wherever you want to put it, because it's defined by how much length that cable has. And then how much power is that light giving you? Is that light giving you enough power to go to ISO 100? And if not, how is this going to affect your image? Does your image have a lot of dark tones and blacks? Or is this going to crush it with a whole bunch of noise? Is it going to make it an unusable image because your camera doesn't have the dynamic range to hack it, or hack it to the point where you're satisfied? In addition to whether the light is hard or soft, I'm using a soft box because that's what she had, but is the light hard or soft, and do you want that on your subject? So how is the light modified? That goes back to that question. And also the backdrop. How are you using the backdrop? Is the backdrop good? Is the backdrop all in the frame? Is the backdrop adding or distracting from the image? Why is the backdrop there? Does it make sense? Does it make sense with your creativity? Do you care about what other people think about the backdrop, or is this everything that you wanted? These are some of the things you need to think about. Is it cropped in the frame good? Is the distortion of the person corrected? That means, are you shooting really close to somebody at 18 millimeters, making their faces look like aliens, or are you correctly backing up and zooming in, or do you have the correct focal distance? I think 50 is a decent focal distance on a full frame sensor, but I don't really want to get any wider than that if I don't have to for any kind of portrait work, because I don't want anybody to look stretched or distorted, because most of the time I'm not stretching or distorting a person unless I'm going for an extremely creative effect, and that's not what we were going for here. So I was shooting at 50 or 85. Sometimes I was shooting at 35 to get a full body shot on the black, but we'll get to that in a second. And these are some of the things you need to understand. Do you have portrait like focal distances coming out of your lenses based off of the distances that you are in? All right. Now we're going to the strobe section. Now, the strobe, it really depends on you personally. Strobes, there's so many more strobes on the market. I don't think there's as many constant lights on the market as there are strobes, because the strobes can be labeled as many different things. You got mono lights as strobes. You got flashes, strobes or flashes. I'm using all these key generalistic terminologies all under one umbrella. But you understand that I'm talking about flashes, strobes, light, they go bang, bang. The reason I'm using the word strobe is because I need you to understand that it's a flash that's going to happen. So when I say strobes, I'm talking about mono lights. I'm talking about speed lights. All of these different types of lights that go under the curtain of strobe can be your light source, your mains, your fills, your accents. Now, these are strictly studio and cinema types of terminology that I'm using. Main, fill, and accent, or rims, or hair lights. All these things are, strictly for the studio and video, cinematography. But if you don't know some of these terminologies, I'll try to put some of these terminologies in the video as you're watching. But how much power does these strobes have? And that's extremely important in a situation like this. That's the first thing I thought, because I was like, this room is really small. That means my 600 watt second mono light from Flashpoint is really going to throw a lot of stuff off because it's so powerful. But then I thought to myself, how much control do I have over this actual mono light? And Flashpoint is such a good brand that I'm like, oh, Flashpoint and Godox made it so these mono lights can actually go down to 1/128th of power. Now, you have to understand that is extremely important, because not all strobes give you that ability. Older strobes, especially flash head systems back in the day, Novatron was terrible for this. They only gave you 1 or 2 stops of flash power that you could use, which means you could only use but so many, but so much of that light, or control so much of that light in any given situation. Especially if you wanted a lot of power in some situations, but you couldn't control it and bring that power down, then you would have to bring those lights back away from your subjects just to make sure that light's not overexposed. It would give you so much of an issue. But nowadays we have technology like the Flashpoint Explorer 600, you got your streak lights, all these things from Flashpoint. And no, I do not endorse, or I'm not sponsored or anything by this brand. I'm just saying in general that you have to understand what you're using, and based off of this new technology, you have so much more control over lights. And that's why photographers love to upgrade their gear, because the smallest chance that you can control the light a little bit more makes a world of a difference. Now, you controlling your power, you have to control the light, not only power wise, but light effectiveness wise, as far as the texture, the tone of the light. What's the light doing? How is it balancing? How is it going everywhere? How is it modified, is what I'm saying. Is it going through a softbox, a bounce card? What are you doing? And then on top of that, you have to understand a lot about your strobes and how they are triggered to get the amount of power from each strobe differently. So in this case, what we were doing, we were using a black backdrop, and that's what she had. She told me she was going to have it. But the thing about the black backdrop is that most people have dark or black hair, or a black piece of clothing or attire or outfit. So you have to understand that black is going to absorb all of that stuff. And you're like, oh, crap. And then the black is not going to have a lot of texture unless you can find and light the black backdrop, and you can reveal some creases, which I could in some situations. In some situations I couldn't. And then I use a post-crop vignette in Photoshop to try to smoothen all that out on the edges and make it look like a real kind of textured background. But it's more so about me showing you guys that you can use the best of what you can with what you have. Now going back to the backdrop, you understand that black doesn't yield to any colors that's like hair or something like that. So you're gonna have to backlight her. So I'm using a main light, which is flash point 600. Now the main light is the flash point 600, which is actually in front of her. That is somewhere around $300 to $400. Black Friday and Cyber Monday brought the price down, but it's definitely not cheap when you're getting into these types of realms. Especially when you want to trigger it manually or automatically trigger it where it does ETTL and it automatically powers everything. So you have to understand all about that to understand where this is going. Then you also have to understand what are you going to backlight it with, because I'm using black. I want to rim this person. I want to get a hair light or something to separate her from the backdrop to make her look more defined, because black really cuts out a lot of definition in your image, especially when you have black hair and black clothing or dark clothing. So you get something with some extra gravitas. You want to make it look a little bit more whatever, prestigious, I guess. And then you want to bring in props. So we brought in props, things to fill up the frame with points of interest. If you're going to take some images on the black, you gotta have something of interest. Maybe that black backdrop has something written up on it, or some different colors or something like that, or you add some more props to the shot. We had some amplifiers that we used, or a monitor for her guitar. Then we used the guitar, and then that added more color because she had black makeup on and stuff like that. All these things add to the creativity of the shot. You also have to really think about the length of the backdrop. Not just now we've been taking pictures of different spots inside, but now we're going to like backdrops and stuff like that where they have a finite amount of space that they cover. Now usually I get the biggest backdrop so I have the maximum control over my frame, but in this case we didn't have the biggest backdrop in the world. What was this, like an 8x10 backdrop? You know, this wasn't like my seamless paper that I usually use, or 12x10 that some people might use. This is a finite space, so you have to make sure that covers the frame. Do you want to show off the frame? Is that what you want it to look like? And then how does the person's body parts interfere with the actual backdrop and how your framing is concerned? And then how much space, I got a fly going around here, or a gnat. But anyway, how much space does this backdrop give you in reference to your focal distance? Because remember, that focal distance has to be at some type of portrait focal distance in most cases that gives them correct body proportions. Now, if you're doing something creative where you're trying to stretch the legs or something like that and get real close, or maybe stretch the head, which I don't ever really do on portraits, you can do that, but most of the cases you want to back up and zoom in and at least get 50 millimeters full frame. All right, and that's pretty much it, guys. Now, I'm going to quickly explain the settings that we were going throughout the entire day, so everybody's not getting mad at me, just putting it in there and not telling everybody, because, oh, it's the settings. The settings make a big difference. What's the setting? What's the setting? Okay, like I said before, guys, we're using 5D Mark II with the 50 millimeter 1.8, 85 1.8, and a 24 to 105 L lens. This is the kit lens, the version 1 that you get with every full frame camera, but I've had it for years, and it doesn't cost as much as it used to. Now, the reason why I bought a 24 to 105 lens is because I knew I was going to be stuck in a situation where I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit just to make the frame work. So that's why I bought that lens, but if I had my way, I wouldn't shoot with that lens at all. And then on top of that, we had the 85 millimeter 1.8. The reason I bought that is because 1.8, you get to bring in a lot of light to the lens, and everything in this situation is lens dependent. How much light can you bring in, and how much distance are you going to have from your subject? Now, the 85 was good for headshots and maybe a couple of torso up shots, but I didn't do too many of those because I didn't have that much space. The 50 was also decent for headshots, but I like the 85 for headshots better than the 50. Notice that 1.8 aperture, when we're using the natural light and the constant light, even though the constant light was good, it still wasn't as impactful as my strobes are, because they're power punch. They're way more powerful than any light that I had today. So using 1.8 was needed in those situations where I didn't have my strobes. I'm done with CenturyFX Studios. Thanks for staying with me. I know I rambled on long enough. Stay tuned for the next episode.